Did you know that rejection, or even just the perception of rejection, can land really hard for folks with ADHD? In fact, there's something that many folks with ADHD deal with called rejection sensitive dysphoria. And this is something I want to talk about in today's video. I want to go through what it is, what it looks like, and how to deal with it. I want to do it all in plain language so that everyone can understand. I really want to try to minimize the clinical jargon. And this is super important because there's not a lot of videos about this topic. And there's an issue, well, there's a lot of issues. One of the issues is that even folks with ADHD who might be dealing with this might not understand it or even know that it exists. And when that happens, there's a lot of shame, guilt, just a lot of things can go wrong when we don't know what's actually happening. And then for people who might be on the receiving end, right, of someone who's having a tough time with rejection, they might not understand. And then there's a lot of mislabeling and a lot of issues, and it causes just a big mess. And I do find that when we can teach about these things and people begin to understand them a little bit better, it's usually a great first step in helping everyone involved. So that's what we're going to do today. All right, so let's just dive in. As always in these videos, I'm going to share my notes with you. It's a raw video, all right? So let's just dive in. I guess real quick, I should probably introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Matt. And there we go. There's the slide. My name is Matt. I'm a therapist in private practice. I own a group practice in New York City, and we specialize in ADHD. It is called Progress Therapy, stylized as PRGRS therapy.com. This video is not about that, but that's who I am. I'm very passionate. Our whole team is passionate about educating folks around ADHD. If you want to know more about the practice, click the link down below. You can check that out. But without further ado, let's talk about rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now, quick caveat, I have been in the habit of calling it rejection sensitivity dysphoria. For whatever reason, that got stuck in my head, and I just keep saying it. So if I do say that, please forgive me, all right? Now, real quick, so what exactly is rejection sensitivity? There it goes, right? What exactly is rejection sensitive dysphoria? Because that's what we're going to talk about in this video, what it is. We can call it RSD for short, what it looks like, and what tends to help. So we'll actually go through a couple things that can be helpful. All right. So what exactly is RSD in plain language? It is intense emotional pain, right? That can be set off by rejection, criticism, or failure. That's not an exhaustive list, right? But these are things that tend to trigger the emotional pain. And it's whether or not there was real, right, or actual rejection or failure, or even if it was perceived, right? And now two things, as you can see down here, there are really two things, sorry about that, two things that make it different than just feeling upset or feeling bad that you experienced rejection, right, which a lot of people feel. But number one is the intensity, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, right? And then also that it can occur even if it's just a perception, right? And with those two things, we are starting to realize that people deal with what's called RSD, okay? So let's dive in a little bit deeper. Now, a couple of things worth knowing about RSD. Number one, it is not currently a diagnosis. So you will not find this in the DSM, right? It is not something that people can be diagnosed with. It's not a personality trait, right? And that's something that people tend to get confused. They might call someone sensitive or overly sensitive, right? Or you just can't handle that. It's just your personality. These are really damaging things to say and really not great because this is not simply a personality trait, okay? So I want to make sure that that's really clear. It also may have a lot to do with brain wiring, right? It may be how people's brains are, for lack of a better term, how people's brains are wired, right? We have different terms for this, right? Neurotypical, neurodivergent, but experiencing RSD or dealing with RSD could have a lot to do with how our brains are wired, okay? And then oftentimes, it's not always exclusive, and it's not everyone with ADHD, but for a lot of folks with ADHD, we do see that RSD as well, right? That's a pair that often travels together, all right? And in all my work with folks with ADHD, I see RSD quite often, all right? Now, one thing you're if this is something new for you, or you've talked to people, or, whatever the case may be, right? One thing you might find real quickly is that if you ask someone to describe, right, people who are dealing with RSD, if you ask them to describe what it's like or the feelings that they're having, many times they don't have words for it. And this kind of phenomena of not having words for it is common, right? And they'll kind of describe that it feels really bad or really intense. There's just not a vocab to describe the feeling. And so that in and of itself is something you will see. Again, it's beyond just quote unquote getting your feelings hurt or feeling upset. Okay. Now, how exactly does it show up? There's a lot of different ways this shows up. In my own clinical experience and even using some, resources from Cleveland Clinic, I wanted to go through a couple of ways in which you might see this come out. One, embarrassment or self-consciousness, but not just kind of the standard or stereotypical, I feel embarrassed, but I can still push through, right? But embarrassment or self-consciousness that comes really fast and it comes really, really strong. Again, not everyone has words for it, but the intensity is above and beyond, okay? Low self-esteem. So we see this reported a lot, right? Having a really hard time believing in yourself after the feelings of rejection or being rejected. When rejection happens, or again, the perception, the emotion can be very, very hard to hold on to, meaning outbursts, right? So some people get enraged. You might see that happening. People break down emotionally, right? You see that as well. Some other things. So you'll see people turning this inward. So some people will describe intense feelings of depression, right? You'll see people even mistaking this, right, for big mood shifts, occasionally mistaking it for bipolar disorder or even borderline personality disorder. So you might see some of that confusion as well. People will describe people pleasing, right? So often wanting to avoid disapproval from anyone, all right? Not taking risks, even if it would be helpful, right? So maybe applying for that job or, doing something like that, right? People will go out of their way to avoid the risk, just to avoid that feeling or the reality of rejection or failure, right? And then we have this other concept of going all out. So some people report that they will just go all in, right? Kind of along the lines of perfectionism, to make sure that they do everything really well or as close to perfect as possible. And of course, when this happens, you see increases in anxiety and things like that. All right. So these are some of the things people report, some of the symptoms that people have identified. And then kind of in line with all this, there are a couple of ways that this can come out. And we've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but we have kind of the outward, right? So more of that outburst, right? Whether that be anger or any other, people describe it as snapping or blowing up, these kinds of things, right? And then you'll notice people, quote unquote, walking on eggshells around you. So you have that outward expression. We have the inward, right? So the shame spiral, the depression, feeling even physically sick, things like that, right? And then another thing, sometimes you have these misread cues, right? So for example, if you walk into a room and your friend or someone you know is there and they look at you a certain way, and you perceive that as a look of rejection or disapproval, that can cause the outward or inward expression of the feelings. So that's just another one I wanted to add there because people report this often. So as a result of this, right, as a result of experiencing these things or just the experience of RSD, what happens? Like there's obviously issues with this, right? But now what's the aftermath? So one of the things you'll see is that people have the intense experience of the emotion, right? Outward, inward, whatever the case may be. And then that clears after some time. And all of a sudden, there's a great wave of shame, a great wave of guilt that comes right afterwards, right? And then you'll find people just devastated by the shame and the guilt of what happened, feeling really, really bad, right? Doing their best to apologize and clean things up, but feeling almost like there was no control in the situation. So you'll see this. And as a result, right, there can be a lot of consequences to this, broken relationships or friendships, issues at work. I mean, they're obviously, right, we don't need to go into great detail about what the different issues are. There could be a lot. But one of the things is people usually come back and say, I feel awful about this. And I felt like I couldn't control it. So then the other thing we have to kind of consider is that not only are these kind of like the expression or like the intense expression inward or outward of the RSD, but we actually have RSD sometimes running things. The way I like to kind of think about it, it can sometimes run things in the background without you even knowing. So what do I mean by this? Number one is, and we kind of alluded to this before, right? So maybe you aren't where you should be or where you want to be, I should say, right? Where you want to be in your job because you just didn't apply for the promotion, right? Because we were afraid of rejection, or we didn't, do that one hobby because we were afraid we were going to fail. But you'll hear people kind of describing not being where they want to be, right? As a result of not going for things because there was a risk or a chance of rejection or failure. So that can happen and kind of run in the background for a while. You'll see people pleasing, right? So again, people will do their best to please others almost at all costs to avoid that feeling of rejection, right? And then what does that mean for the people doing the people pleasing? They often don't get what they want from something as small as where do you want to go for dinner and never actually saying it, right? All the way up to something big, right? So people pleasing, we see this. And then perfectionism, right? And of course, this topic has been covered a lot by people, but the cost of perfectionism, we might have great output perhaps, right? But it does run us to the ground. A lot of anxiety, depression, physical health cost, and things like that. Now, really, if you're someone who's dealing with this or this is resonating, it's important to know that these kind of tactics that we just covered, right? Like, not going for things or people pleasing, these are coping skills, right? And they did work, right? Or they do work to avoid that extremely intense experience. At the same time, they have a high cost, right? And so that's where people tend to start to think about, well, what can I do differently? How can I improve? How can I manage the RSD? And on one hand, we kind of have the biological aspect, right? The brain wiring aspect. And then on the other, there are things that we can do to improve so we can live more effectively with the RSD or to overcome the RSD, however you want to look at it. All right. Now, I'm not going to go into great detail specifically about strategies like that we can practice today. But when you look at some of the other experts in the field talking about RSD, they're going to highlight a couple of different treatments. Again, it's an eclectic approach. So you'll see people talking about CBT as a helpful methodology to overcome RSD or to work through RSD. You're going to hear people talking about DBT skills. We do a lot of this in our practice, right? So in that, you're going to be teaching distress tolerance. You're going to be teaching interpersonal effectiveness, and even just from those two titles, right? Interpersonal effectiveness and distress tolerance, you can tell that skills around that could really help with some issues regarding RSD. ACT therapy is another one that can help. Mindfulness practices and things like that can help as well. So the good news is with these different approaches or these different evidence-based practices, there are things we can do to begin working on the RSD and the associated issues with that. Okay. And then a couple other things that I find to be really, really helpful. Number one is psychoeducation. So a video just like this, maybe it's the first time you're hearing about RSD and it's resonating and you're like, oh my gosh, that's something that I've dealt with, right? So learning about it, educating loved ones about it, that's a really great step. You have people talking about self-compassion, right? So this is another thing that helps. In a recent training that we were in, they talked a lot about self-compassion. And in the same training, they talked a lot about social strategies as well, right? So maybe identifying what some of the issues are around rejection or, the big triggers, and then creating small kind of safer environments where we can take some risks, right? Maybe a small level risk, something like that. So all of these things can help. I think with all the things I'm mentioning, the good news is that there are things that can help. There are things we can work on. So it is not hopeless. We can certainly improve. Okay. And that is all I have for you today about RSD. I wanted to make sure this video didn't go too long, although it's already almost 15 minutes. I hope this video is helpful for you. I hope you learned something. My intention is to teach you about ADHD, whether or not you have it or you know someone with it, so that you are more informed, which, as I mentioned before, I think is a great first step. All right. So anyway, hope this is helpful for you. Hope you learned something. Until the next time, I will see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.